So this is part B of the Khudilar television channel being broadcast only online on the internet by the Khudilar campaign in association with the associated actions and campaigns. And just to remind those interested in knowing the publishing details, publishing data, we spend cash around £20 every day from the campaign to buy the printed copies of the papers, London papers, including the Communist Party's Morning Star. And that is not including other research costs that we bear every single day around the clock. That is number one. Number two is that the actual editorial, research, investigation, and other things are done, of course, by the Khudilar campaign, but the actual specialist work that has been going on for a very long time is done by the Adhikar Publishing Foundation, Adhikar Media Foundation. And all of this is part of the movement defending the community in and from the East End of London in the UK. And we operate apparently from the East End of London, but we actually operate by encompassing and including and covering the whole of the UK and the Western Hemisphere, so far as is possible to access the opinions and the so-called propaganda narrative that is being promoted by the accessible outlets in France, in Germany, across the Western Europe and in North America, including Canada, and parts of the so-called Latin American, South American countries. And again, we also take a look at Australia and New Zealand and their kind of territorial peripheries and what is happening in Southern Africa. And we also are aware of the outlets published from Chennai in India, Mumbai in India, Kolkata in India, and in Delhi. Essentially, our kind of remit, our focus, our range is to look at the contents of those outlets that are agencies of the agendas that affect the other parts of the world. Notice we haven't mentioned Bangladesh because Bangladesh and Pakistan are not in positions that are comparable in terms of the structure, that we have summarily stated there, that we actually use for the diagnosis. So although it is called diagnosis of Fleet Street Papers, it actually is a diagnosis of the entire imperial kind of past, the British Empire, dating back 200 years. That is what we are doing. And for example, today's Times in London, page 26, letters to the editor, has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 letters under that banner. Now, first of all the letters are signed by European named persons. They may not be European in physical kind of appearance, but the names are European very much. First one is described or given the name as Lord MacDonald of River Glaven. And he's somebody that I have actually have some knowledge of and is described as a QC, and he was the Director of Public Prosecutions for 5 years from 2003 to 2008. And it appears that he is based at a licensed law traders, barristers' chambers called Matrix Chambers in Gray's Inn. So that's MacDonald. And there is the second letter is signed by somebody called Lord Blair of Boughton. Now, as anyone watching this or reading our stuff knows, when we use Lord, we don't use it Lord. We use it within quotation marks, because no human being should be called Lord. That is our ethical principle, and that is what we stand by. But here we are quoting, so it's, let's say, within quotation marks, Lord Blair of Boughton, and is described as Metropolitan Police Commissioner 2005 to 2008. And it seems that he has been deposited in the House of Peers. That is to say, he is condemned to be a member of the House of Peers, which is also known as, within quotation marks, House of Lords. And then the third one is signed by somebody called Brian Pearson, who is described as from Skipton in North Yorkshire. And then the fourth one is Meg Martin. Morton looks like a name of a woman. And she is listed as being from Otley in West Yorkshire. And the fifth and the final one is another female named Lynn Aconley from Rainhill in Merseyside. Now let's look at the letter from the person who is the Metropolitan Police Commissioner from 2005 to 2008. That person was, of course, Ian Blair. The name Blair of Boughton is actually the name of Ian Blair. And the Ian Blair, let's say, put it kindly, was persuaded to resign during 2008, very much in the wake of Boris Johnson getting into the incumbency of the corrupt mayor post, after Ken Livingstone kind of gave the post to Boris Johnson, because during the year to the 2008 so-called mayoral election, none of this is anywhere. It's me saying this for the enlightenment and understanding and contextual appreciation of anyone watching this. When I say anyone, I don't expect anyone watching this. So if anyone watches this, fine. Otherwise, I'm saying it on the record. That is what matters. Now, this guy, Ian Blair, was under severe pressure, even according to Free Street, during 2008. And the pressure he was under was a propaganda pressure. It wasn't pressure for justice. He was under pressure of propaganda, because the propaganda was concerned with the Stockwell. In London, there is a Stockwell station, underground station, tube station, which is based in the London borough of Lambeth. And Stockwell is not far from the other side, if you like, of the River Thames, where the Palace of Westminster kind of stands upstream from Stockwell. But it's near Vauxhall, let's say. Stockwell is not far from Vauxhall station, where near this cricket field is situated. Now, what Ian Blair, as the commissioner of the police, was being accused of was connected with the murder of this Brazilian, because the Brazilian was murdered allegedly on the suspicion that he looked like a Pakistani. Now, these are the details that have been published about this victim of the murder. The Brazilian was an electrical engineer working for electrical engineering as an electrical engineer of some sort, and he was on his way to work in the morning of the day he was murdered. Now, this guy, they said afterwards that he was targeted because he looked like a Pakistani. Now, later reports said that he had been kind of stalked and spied on and followed for a considerable period of time before he was murdered. So, the claim that he looked like a Pakistani didn't actually stick. That is to say, it wasn't credible, believable, because if he looked like a Pakistani, then his Pakistani so called identity would have been clear to his followers, whoever was, that is, spies, the people who were spying on him. And by all accounts, this Brazilian didn't look like a Pakistani in the skin. I mean, in terms of facial shapes and height, whatever, that is a different kind of consideration, but he didn't look like a Pakistani. And I think his pigmentation, that is to say, his skin color wasn't similar to the average Pakistanis that you could find in the UK. His skin color was, I think, noticeably lighter than the skin color of the average Pakistanis that could be found in the UK at the time, around the time that this Brazilian was murdered. The other thing is that even if, supposing this is a legal kind of question, post facto, and this Brazilian has not been mentioned in the discussions, in the public discussions in Britain for a long time, he will be now mentioned quite a few times, I think. And I'll come to that, why he will be mentioned. Now, we're talking on the first item, Sarah Everard. This is the one we are talking about. And the last one, the Times and the police. Now, even if this Brazilian was identified as being or suspected of being a Pakistani, then it didn't follow that he should have been shot. That means that anyone who was a Pakistani was to be murdered or killed on the spot. That doesn't follow. That there has to be something else, which is anyone, whatever the background, whatever the nationality, whatever connections, has to be seen to be doing some crime, serious crime, so serious that they needed to be murdered. And there was no evidence of anything that was criminal, let alone severely criminal or threatening to society, that this particular individual, the Brazilian, was doing or likely to do. So anyone who has heard so far and needs to know more has got no problem in checking up on the most of the things. What I'm saying is more kind of moderate. Very serious, severe criticism of the Metropolitan Police were made, and they are on the record, and they can be accessed online, internet, and by other sources that are accessible publicly and that are in the public domain. Now, this is relevant to today because in the Times letter signed by this Lord whatever of Boughton, Ian Blair, that is the commissioner at the time when the Brazilian was murdered in the Stockwell station in the Tube. The reason is this Ian Blair is mentioning, he's saying calls for Cressida Dick to resign are unreasonable. She is the finest officer of her generation. Now, this is an opinion, of course. I mean, there is no evidence that can actually be examined, and there is no context. And the reference to generation is completely a matter of opinion by this person. And the reason why Ian Blair is mentioning such a kind of positive description of Cressida Dick is this, that Cressida Dick, who is now in the post that Ian Blair was in post in 2008 as the Commissioner of the London Metropolitan Police. The Cressida Dick was the, if you like, line manager, the relevant line manager who must have authorized the killing of the Brazilian. And at the time, Cressida Dick was severely criticized by the people who called for justice for the Brazilian. And this is why Ian Blair is sensitive to the calls for her resignation, because he was very close in professional terms, of course. I mean, he was very close to her when he was commissioner, in the post of commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. And that is why he is allowed to say that she is the finest officer of our generation. I mean, that is a very, very wide and very kind of comprehensive praise for Cressida Dick by this person. Why is this significant? Because the Times is not running anything against the police. It's all really for the police and for the commissioner, the Cressida Dick, to stay in there. And there are other opinions that have been expressed during today in the mainstream media. Not the Times, not the Daily Mail or the Sun, because they have already criticized Cressida Dick, and they are going to continue to criticize Cressida Dick, because the overwhelming number of active and thinking women are not likely to stop this campaign, as I said earlier in part A. Now, why Ian Blair is saying any of this and why he has written the letter is, of course, not clear, but the point is that he has missed the point. The people who are calling for Cressida Dick to resign are not saying that she's kind of somebody who has done wrong things all the time that she has been in post. They're not even talking about her role in ordering the shooting of the Brazilian man. So why is he praising her? Because although he resigned in 2008, he is trying to recover some of his reputation. And he is conscious that his legacy should be rehabilitated and established. And that is what he's doing in there. Ian Blair is not. He's not concerned about the impact of the police conduct and the police strategy and the police behavior. He's not concerned about that, because to him, the police are above the law. That is what he's saying, and I'll come to that. And it's very important to point out what is the basis of my saying that he's saying that the police are above the law. Now he's referring to Robert Mark, not Stevens. Robert Mark as the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, who apparently said 50 years ago, the police are the anvil on which society beats out the problems and aberrations of social inequality, racial prejudice, weak laws, and ineffective legislation. This is a very inappropriate time and quotation. I'll explain why in a minute. And this is the diagnosis of Listi and diagnosis of the Times decision to run this piece. This letter from the former Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. And this is the image of anvil. It's like a table, like a desk. That's the image of the anvil, let's say. Let's get a large enough image so that it can be seen by the camera. This is the one. Let's see, this is the, is this going to be large enough? Okay. So this is the anvil. This is the anvil that Ian Blair is kind of referring to as he's quoting Robert Mark, who was in post as Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police 50 years ago. So that's the anvil. Let's say what else is available in that quotation. And we shall be doing that. And this is ridiculous because what Ian Blair is doing is not being original. He is actually quoting or using the quotations that have been published several times in the last, let's say, 15 years by the Times and also by the Guardian, but by the Independent. And the Independent piece actually, Saturday, dated the 22nd of October 2011, is by Ian Blair. So he has been making use of this quotation as part of his trade, as a business of expertise. And he's referring to the 1993 White Paper on Police Reform, issued by the last government, stated that the main job of the police is to catch criminals. In contrast, the overarching purpose of the police service issued by the present administration, that is the government, in 2011, that is the Conservatives, is, and this is a quote, to build a safe, just, and tolerant society in which the rights and responsibilities of individuals, families, and communities are properly balanced, and the protection and security of the public are maintained. So this is the thing that he said he was comfortable with, this Ian Blair. And then he goes on to quote this Robert Mark quote, which he has quoted again in the Times letter published today. And he says a number of things, this Ian Blair. And the last paragraph totally contradicts what he has quoted Robert Mark as saying. The last paragraph by Ian Blair, as published on The Independent in 2011, says, 2011 meaning it was the David Cameron's government. Despite much effort, says Ian Blair, the police service has not thought through the consequences, the implications, the requirements of modernity. And then he says in the next sentence, it needs to do so now. And finally, in the final kind of sentence. No, the penultimate sentence, he says, if modernization is to happen, the police need help. In order to help with enquiries, you need to invite the cops in from the cold. Now, what he's saying is that the police need to be in partnership with the politicians, parliament, and legislators and the government. If that is the case, if that was the case in 2011, when nothing like this murder of this very innocent person took place and the assault on so many mourners took place, and he's there denying all of that and trying to kind of write off and dismiss any responsibility, any allegation of responsibility being laid at the door of the police. So he's contradicting himself. And I think the Times should publish a series of very serious rebuttals and rejections of this kind of behavior and stance that is being in denial. That is the police being in denial. Okay. So going back to the first letter on the kind of 5 letters under the heading Cressida Dick and the policing of the vigil. Now this MacDonald guy of River Glaven, it sounds like a Scottish place. We shall look up and see if it is in Scotland. But he was in post in 2003 to 2008, in post as the Director of Public Prosecutions. I think he was there. Was he there immediately before Keir Starmer? We should check on that one. Starmer is the leader of the Labour Party in Parliament now. But from 2008 until 2013, I think, Starmer was the Director of Public Prosecutions. So let's go back to this MacDonald of River Glaven, who says, he says clearly very strong words against the police for their behavior at the Clapham vigil. He says that the Met's behavior at the Clapham vigil was ill-judged and odious. Now, odious means stinks. It smells of badness. Images of young women laying wreaths being bundled to the ground and handcuffed by male police officers are likely to become iconic for all the wrong reasons. Well, the point I made as well, that although it couldn't be seen, although the whole picture of Patsy Stevenson or his assaulters could not be seen, but it was clear that they were all men that were assaulting her or standing over her. That's what this MacDonald is saying. Images of young women having wreaths being bundled to the ground. Sorry, laying wreaths being bundled to the ground and handcuffed by male police officers are likely to become iconic for all the wrong reasons. Then he goes on. Nevertheless, Cressida Dick has hitherto shown herself to be a sensitive and intelligent leader of the Metropolitan Police, and calls for her to resign are overblown. Now this is proof of the corruption of the judicial bureaucracy. I mean, he's This McDonald is one of the licensed law traders, of course. And as I have said repeatedly, time and again, there is not one licensed law trader alive and kicking or talking today that actually says anything that I accept. And this is the proof. Because why is he stepping forward and defending Cressida Dick? I mean, what is the relevance of him certifying her and condemning those who are calling for her resignation as making an overblown claim? We shall come to that, more of that. And he is coming across as another idiot in the next sentence. He says she should urgently find out what went wrong at Clapham and ensure that those directing this disastrous operation learn some fast and necessary lessons. Now, this moron, obviously, this QC moron, former director of public prosecutions moron, as I said, I have come across him, and at least during one particular kind of series of campaigning that I had to do against racists in the media, he was on the other side, of course. I know what it was. And I'll check that. But subject to that checking, I think it was around the time of the campaign against the head teacher in the Bradford school called Barnage School. So it was the Barnage School, and this criminal, racist, took the side of the racist head teacher at Barnage School. We shall check all of that, and I come back to the kind of updating disclaimer in due course. So note what I'm saying. I'm not saying conclusively that it was the Barnage School, but I will check that. Subject to that, this MacDonald is saying that Cressida Dick should find out who was directing these disastrous activities. That is stupid, literally stupid, because the newspapers have already said, as the Guardian says on the front page, and we have printed it, that Cressida Dick spoke to Priti Patel, the Interior Minister, shortly before the assault on the mourners on Saturday. So I mean, she doesn't need to investigate. She was the one. She was the one. Then he goes on stupidly. Meanwhile, the government could help by abandoning the spectacularly authoritarian proposals now before Parliament to bear down still further on the right to public protest. Now, anyone who is watching this or would watch this from abroad and has not lived in the UK and has no experience of directly kind of confronting and challenging the various layers of the corrupt legal bureaucracies need to know this, that this is a kind of classic summary of the stupidity and racism and denial that runs right through the English jurisprudence. Jurisprudence is obviously, admittedly, a kind of uncommon like word. It's a jurisprudence. Spelling is not always possible for people with less facilities in terms of spelling and cognitive abilities. This jurisprudence, this is a classic summary of the English jurisprudence, which is sick. On the one hand, he says that the police have done disastrous things, and he says that the police bill should not be allowed to pass. But on the other side, he says that anyone who is calling for Cressida Dick to resign is making an overblown call. Thus, he is excusing the very person who ordered the disaster. So he is admitting that something went wrong, but he says that nobody should be held to account. That is the jurisprudence. When the judges kind of make meandering, kind of long-winded, kind of apparently serious judicial wisdom statements on their way to excusing the offenders, and mostly excusing the racists, excusing the big business, and as has happened in the last, let's say, as has been exposed in the last 5 years, young blonde women criminals. Several of the judges who have let young blonde criminals walk free have admitted that they have done that because this criminal is good-looking, attractive woman. So there is no secret. Because the conventional slogan is that justice is blind. That is to say, neither creed, religion, faith, sex, whatever influences the actual judgment. And justice is therefore served with total impartiality. That's not the case. And Cressida Dick let's look at the this guy Ian Blair, and we'll find out the link with Cressida Dick. So Ian Blair is listed as Ian Blair, but the full name given here in the entry in the Wikipedia is Ian Warwick Blair, and then the second name is Baron Blair of Boughton. QPM, I don't know what the thing is about the QPM. He was born the 19th of March. This is his birthday coming. Today is the 16th, so 3 days on his birthday. And he was born in March, on the 19th of March, 1953. And he joined the police in 1974. And he was born in Chester. Okay, so in the entry, of course, which is kind of adulterated and diluted, it says the basic things that John Charles de Menezes, whatever the pronunciation, was shot and killed by armed police. And it says suicide, armed police who mistakenly believed he was a suicide bomber. And the Metropolitan Police was convicted by a jury of violating health and safety laws, highlighting 19 catastrophic errors. Notice that, and remember what I say about the judicial process. It said highlighted 19 catastrophic errors and convicted the Metropolitan Police of violating health and safety laws. But it said it was an isolated breach under quite extraordinary circumstances. And the London Metropolitan Police Authority and the London Assembly were unable to get him to resign. And there are all kinds of list of allegations against Blair. So there is a whole list of allegations and scandals and so on against Ian Blair. And in May 2008, it was reported in the press that Blair's contract as Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police Service would not be renewed when it expired in 2000. On October 2, 2008, Blair announced he would resign as Metropolitan Police Commissioner with effect from 1st of December 2008. And then he said he blamed the lack of support from London Mayor Boris Johnson, saying that without the mayor's backing, I do not think I can continue. And the Home Secretary of the time, Jackie Smith, and the Prime Minister Gordon Brown paid tribute to Blair's service. And Paul Stevenson took over on 28th of November 2008. Blair is entitled to a full police pension, estimated to be about 160,000 per year, based on his 240,000 pound commissioner's salary. So his pension is 160,000 pounds a year. Now, count that. And so the Times needs to tell its readers who this person is that is backing Cressida Dick, because it seems that the judicial process, the legal process, cannot protect women in the context of the news that is dominating today and has been dominating for the last 4 years, 4 days since the assault on the grieving mourners who gathered in the Clapham Common. Spot approximately where this young person absolutely young person was kidnapped and taken away, and she was murdered somewhere. Now, as I said, I mean, it is absolutely possible that this woman was sexually assaulted, brutalized, and raped before being murdered. Why murder this person? Why murder her? So that has to be one of the most shocking things that has happened, because although young women are attacked and tragically, they are found later. Some of them are not found, but most of them are found later. This happened like in the broad daylight. I mean, 9:30 in Clapham in London. I mean, it's not depth of night. It wasn't really kind of dark. And for her to be attacked by a policeman, it's not the people calling for the resignation of Cressida Dick for the Saturday kind of violence against the mourners by the police. It's the fact that the main person, Sarah Everard, was kidnapped by an actively engaged, employed member of the Metropolitan Police. I mean, that is the most shocking thing. That a London policeman attacks a London policeman, very much a white city. I mean, attacks a very white, ethnicity-wise, I'm saying, not necessarily in terms of the skin or whatever. Very white in terms of culture. A white young woman, absolutely innocent and absolutely going by about her own business and going home from the home of a friend she had been seeing. This is the one. Because when the English-born members of the gang in the northern English kind of boroughs and towns targeted mainly white girls, and they sexually groomed them, they raped them, they pimped and prostituted them. And when this became known about various cities across the north of England, there were outrages and there were outrages and there were outrages, which meant that combined effect of the outrages created a new racist and anti-Muslim kind of mythology and narrative, which is that if they are Pakistani origin men, then they are likely to be sexual predators against the mainly white girls, and so on, and the kind of contents of the various accusations and allegations that arose and that became proliferated against these gangsters made up of males born to Pakistani families in English cities. And it was correctly said that the local police in those cities, and the local councils in those cities, and the local MPs, members of parliament from those cities, and the local political party, which is mainly in those kind of times when these girls were being attacked and violated and targeted and exploited and raped and brutalized and their lives being destroyed. All of these took place in areas that were predominantly politically controlled by the Labour Party. So this was an additional factual kind of allegation and the burden was very much placed on the shoulders of the Labour Party and the Pakistani men and the Pakistani elders. I'll come to that comparison, to that aspect, as relating to the situation in Tower Hamlets and Newham. So what the allegation was about the police, or that the police, two allegations against the police. One was that the police didn't take seriously complaints by the girls or about the girls being exploited in that way. And secondly, in some cases, not in all the cases, but in some cases, the police, white police, the police framed the victims, the girls, of sexual exploitation and abuse and rape, and attacked them, and they framed them. So we are making this commentary, Diagnosis of Fleet Street, in the afternoon of Tuesday, the 16th of March, 2021. And I'm still in the middle of diagnosing the Times newspaper. And I'm diagnosing the Times newspaper about the fact that it has published two long letters compared to the length. And it has published the letters supporting the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Cressida Dick, against the calls for her resignation or for her to be sacked that campaigners have been making in the last 3 days, especially since the beginning of the assault on the innocent mourners that had gathered at Clapham Common or in Clapham on Saturday to pay respects and to remember and to honor Sarah Everard, who had been kidnapped, abducted, and murdered by a Metropolitan policeman, as alleged, and as he is now fully charged and is due to be put on trial a few months from now. I mean, what does it show? The Times newspaper hasn't got any space, because this is a shocking emergency. And yet the Times newspaper doesn't have any space to give the truth of the liability of the Metropolitan Police. And the editorial doesn't actually contain any evidence that the Times is treating the attacks on the women at all these stages as worth being treated as the serious violations that they are. And the other papers will come to in a minute. Now there is this number, 15,000 people have been killed by hospitals. That's not the words that the kind of Times is using, but that is what it is. And there is also a kind of straightforward news item without any quotation marks, as if it's going to happen. Terrorists expected to hit Britain with dirty bomb attack by 2030. That's only 9 years away. No idea whether they will do that 9 years from now or before. And there is a piece by Johnson, which is headed in such a stupid way that it is kind of discouraging me from reading even even the first paragraph, because it's absolutely stupid. Why? Because it says that the world needs Britain to be global. I mean, the world needs Britain to be global, not that the Britain needs to be global with the world. Think about that. So we shall be and the other stupid thing that Boris Johnson is saying, and the Times is not questioning, is this idiotic plan that plainclothes police will patrol bars and clubs to protect women. Now, hang on a minute. That is assuming that the plainclothes police will be reliable and they won't kidnap, abduct, and murder women visiting pubs. The deputy commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, another woman, has refused to appear before an MP's committee and answer questions that are current, that is concerning the murder, abduction of Sarah Everard and the attack on the mourners that gathered at Clapham Common to mourn for her and mourn her. If the Metropolitan Police Deputy Commissioner is refusing to appear before members of Parliament, then it shows that she is not showing recognition of the MP's remit to question her. Apparently, according to The Guardian, she says she is too busy to appear to answer questions. Now, that's not the only one. Another police person from the Metropolitan Police has told a woman who reported a man who had flashed, that is to say, taken off their clothes in front of them, in front of the woman or women. And when this was kind of conveyed in a phone call, or contact with the Metropolitan Police, the Metropolitan Police person who answered the call said that the Metropolitan Police were too busy to take any action on that one. Remember what we are talking about. If the Metropolitan Police are too busy to take action against a sexual attacker, aren't they saying that sexual attacks like that are no longer crimes? Think about that. So that is what that one is saying. And the other one that said that the Deputy Commissioner of the Police said to the MP's committee that she was too busy to attend. And the details, as reported by The Guardian, let's see what the Deputy Commissioner is saying. So this is time 4 hours ago this has been posted. So Scotland Yard has suggested its Deputy Commissioner is too busy to be cross-examined in a legal case Okay, let's say that it's not the MPs committee, but let's check what the actual story is about. So, Scotland Yard, that is Metropolitan Police, is called Scotland Yard, has suggested that its deputy commissioner is too busy to be cross examined in a legal case about an undercover officer who deceived a woman into a long term sexual relationship. And Sir Stephen House is a key witness in the legal claim being brought against the Metropolitan Police by a woman called Kate Wilson. And so the Kate Wilson, who is an environmental and social justice activist, who was deceived into a 2-year intimate relationship by undercover officer Mark Kennedy. Kate Wilson is alleging that Kennedy, who infiltrated the environmental and left-wing group between 2003 and 2010, infringed her human rights. At an earlier stage of the legal case, police admitted that Kennedy's managers knew that he was deceiving her and allowed the deception to continue. So here is an admission that the Metropolitan Police admitted, number one, to knowing that one of the police persons was in a sexual relationship by deceiving the woman. And after, despite the knowledge that they had that this was going on, they allowed that man to continue deceiving this woman. That is in that piece, that is in the package. And this week, Wilson's lawyers applied to cross examine House, that is the woman who is the deputy to Cressida Dick. Charlotte Kilroy, Wilson's QC, sought to challenge his evidence, which she said was central to the Met's defense in the case. House has submitted 4 witness statements about Kennedy and his managers, drawing on 10,000 pages of internal documents. He is the only former or serving officer who has submitted evidence to the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, which will adjudicate Wilson's claim. No other police officer are due to give live evidence to the IPT when it sits to hear Wilson's case over 7 days from 19th of April. Now, the deputy is not a woman. I mean, if I said that, then that was inadvertent. The House is the name of the deputy who is called the deputy to Cressida Dick, Sir Stephen House. Now, David Perry, QC for the Metropolitan Police, argued that it was not necessary for House to be cross-examined by Wilson's lawyers. Now, that shows that the Metropolitan Police are not following even the very fragile kind of procedures in the due process kind of framework. And this is the picture of the policeman who had a relationship with a woman. He had sexual relationships with 3 women during his time undercover between 1995 and 2000. And he's being called Jim Boiling. And it's the same person, Rob Evans, who has been reporting on this one. He's the Jim Boiling, who deceived 3 women and had sex with 3 of them while he was spying on them. And these are the kind of, if you like, scattered all over the place evidence of the police being unfit for purpose and police doing these kind of things. Now, the anvil that Robert Mark said the police were, which anvil was doing what? The fact that Ian Blair has quoted this so often in his allegedly expert opinion or expert comments about the state of the police and what the police should be doing shows that there is no political, democratic accountability or audit for the police, or no audit of the police. Now, that means that McDonald's kind of successor as the director of public prosecutions, Keir Starmer, who is a QC and who was the DPP after immediately following McDonald's term, that was 2003 to 2008. Starmer served 2008 to 2013 as the DPP. Now, this man is now the democratic kind of leader of the Labour Party in the UK House of Commons. Now, what has he to say about any of these? Nothing. What he has said amounts to nothing. And the same thing applies to what Sadiq Khan has said, nothing. Because Sadiq Khan, as I said earlier, posted a tweet saying that he was not satisfied that the vigil was policed properly. Notice the language of Sadiq Khan. Yesterday in the Parliament Square, thousands of women gathered, and there were very serious, unanimous opinion by the women that what had happened up to Saturday would not be allowed to go on. And I believe there are indications that various women would continue the demand and the movement. And it is unstoppable. I think it is unstoppable. And all the racists and all the sexists in the media mainstream, in parliament, in government, in the Fleet Street, they will do their best or their worst to defeat the women and undermine them. But there will be some, for commercial reasons in the media, the likes of the Daily Mail and the Sun, the Scum, that they will actually report some of this. Unlike the previous record, that sexual crime against women and crimes committed by police have not been given due prominence. This is not going to happen. And I think this is shown in today's Daily Mail and the Sun. So in the last half an hour, Sky News has posted 17 minutes ago, the Daily Mirror 23 minutes ago, and the Somerset Live 25 minutes ago, and others have done. The Daily Mail, for example, has the Daily Mail has not posted anything in the last half an hour. But let's see what. And there is a piece in the Scottish Daily Record. Let's see what this one says. The mom of the murdered Glasgow woman has spoken of her distress at the similarity between her daughter's case and that of Sarah Everard. Beatrice Jones, whose daughter Moira was raped and murdered in 2008, penned an emotional letter urging people to keep Sarah's loved ones in mind. They have experienced nightmare on top of nightmare, she said. We send love to them all and wish them all the strength they need to get through all the dark days ahead. And and the trauma that Sarah Everett's loved ones, whoever they are, her parents, boyfriend, other people close to her, and the trauma they're going through cannot be imagined, they cannot be described, and we don't want to add to that by adding any discussion, except to say that none of this has been mentioned by any of the people who are defending the Home Secretary Priti Patel and defending the Commissioner of the Police Cressida Dick and the behavior of the police, and those who are issuing statements saying that the police are at various stages too busy to answer questions of any kind. This is not, when the mythology of Dixon of Dock Green police is kind of referred to, they paint a picture of the police, the British police, being family friendly, very chatty, and very much well behaved. It never happened, but that's the mythology. Dixon of Dock Green, that was fostered by a television program in the early days of television. Now, people day to day, everyday life, have reason to contact the police for various issues concerning health, safety, emergencies. And all of that is based on the assumption that the police are 100% safe, 100% reliable. Now, the murderer of Sarah Everard has paid to that. That is to say, this murderer has destroyed all such assumptions. So all right-thinking people in society must recognize this and work to create a society where the police are accountable to the people and real consent. Policing by consent is there. That is to say, that the police do the service to the people and not behave like oppressors. Right across the world, and right across the kind of discussions about societies and policing, oppression in all these faraway countries, that's the fantasy, because it is happening here, right here in London. But in the fantasy narrative about faraway countries having oppressive police states, dictatorships, that is what the gullible 52% have been fed there, and the image of the British police as being superior to all the other oppressive, brutal police above the law has made it impossible to even have a word in edgeways in any conversation demanding that the police be held to equal accountability as ordinary people, not more accountability than ordinary people, or equal accountability. That's for the safety of the police and that's safety of the citizen. And this letter from, well, these two letters, one from MacDonald, this former DPP, and the other from Blair, the former commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. These two letters deny that. And this other person was written from Oxford. Is it Oxford? Let's see where that one comes from. The West Yorkshire is clueless. She said that the police didn't have any option. The police did have option. For example, when they were negotiating with this particular individual who was mostly described as the main organizer of the vigil, before the vigil, they were kind of negotiating or were in contact with this person. And they could have said to her that the condition that the mourners and vigil participants would have to maintain social distance. There is no evidence that the police made such a condition, nor is there any evidence that the organizers refused to observe the conditions. Now, they are finding any kind of excuses to discredit the vigil and the mourning, because Patel is reportedly has said that the vigil was hijacked. Now, what does she mean? She means that bad people, took over the vigil for their own agenda. What does she mean? What does she mean? Nobody hijacked it. If the police are they saying that Patsy Stevenson, who was seen on the ground, who has been seen worldwide as the young woman, very young woman, and she has told the Times that she was just standing there when they attacked her, when the police attacked her. So who hijacked the vigil? It was the police attacking the likes of Patsy Stevenson that hijacked the vigil. And here is a John Crace piece. Now, as I said before, Crace has been degenerating after making a good and overdue kind of start of being almost an independent kind of sketch writer, making fun of the lawyers, including Boris Johnson. He has been deteriorating and degenerating because he wants to keep his job under Keith Vane at The Guardian. But this one might contain just the odd paragraph that makes him come across as almost independent. Now, the heading of this sketch by John Crace on The Guardian reads, "The right to protest is a fundamental one, as long as it does not annoy Priti Vacant." Vacant is the Priti Patel lack of intellect. That is what he's saying now. Police violence against women holding a peaceful vigil about a violence against women was never going to be a great look. So it was inevitable that the Home Secretary, that is Priti Vacant, would be obliged to give a statement to MPs about the events on Clapham Common on Saturday, after a serving officer was charged with the murder of Sarah Everard. And it was just as inevitable that Priti Patel would navigate the entire session without giving much away about what she and the Metropolitan Police Commissioner had discussed in the run-up to the vigil. That's it. That is true. And he goes on, and he ends the sketch today, John Crace, in The Guardian. Everything had been fine for 8 hours or so at the vigil. Tory Fair Jones added helpfully. And then a peaceful event had been hijacked by militants, they say, the Tories say. Yes, that was exactly it, Priti Vacant agreed. Conservative Charles Walker wasn't having this. MPs were to blame, he said. They had criminalized freedom of protest and were up to their neck in it. Patel wasn't the only one to look startled by this intervention. It's not often that she isn't the most batshit crazy person in the room. So what John Crace is saying, that the Tories are in denial, as is Priti Patel. And that Priti Patel, well, he hasn't said it, but I'm saying it. Priti Patel and Cressida Dick did agree the plan, whatever the plan was, because Crace is saying that she didn't talk about it. But the Keir Starmer fronted cabal of the Labour Party MPs must make powerful demands as MPs for Patel to disclose the full extent of what she discussed with the Commissioner of the Police before the police descended on the peaceful vigil and mourners. We shall be continuing on that one. Now we are talking about Charlie Hebdo. Now, Charlie Hebdo, as you can see on the banner, just underneath my kind of appearance. Charlie Hebdo is the magazine. I mean, the name doesn't suggest it's a magazine, but it is a magazine. It's not a person. Charlie Hebdo is a magazine in France that came into news itself about 5 years ago, or some years ago, let's say, when two French, quote, Muslims attacked a number of people in the office and murdered them. Now, those murderers, of course, were responsible for the additional anti-Muslim hatred that spread immediately. But there is no trace whatsoever of those two murderers in any way, shape, or form as having contributed to anything except to the adding to the spread of hatred against Muslims generally. And because it was allegedly carried out by two French Muslims, allegedly two Muslim brothers, French born or French nationals, the venom and the demonization of ordinary Muslims in France and Western Europe has increased to that extent. So Charlie Hebdo, until this week that is, has been a champion of freedom and free speech, etc., against the Muslim tyranny and tyrannical Muslim mind of intolerance and all that has been fueled by the murder. And the murderers' alleged reason for murdering those journalists was that the Charlie Hebdo magazine had published imagined fantasy kind of cartoons based on fantasy images of the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, peace be on him. Now there exists no picture of the Prophet, so therefore whoever claims to be kind of attacking his picture is doing this on a fantastic or fantasy based kind of imagined photo of him. So after the Charlie Hebdo published the mocking images, imagined images of the Prophet of Islam, all the people in the West who were against Muslims generally celebrated that event, that attack, and they said, fantastic. They said that is the freedom of expression, that they said. There was no exception. All of them joined together and celebrated the freedom of expression by the freedom of expression as kind of exercised by Charlie Hebdo against the Muslims. And they maintained this position up to 5 years until this week. And suddenly all these people who had celebrated Charlie Hebdo's attacks on the Muslims and the Prophet and insulting the Prophet said, no, Charlie Hebdo is disgusting. Disgusting. And they didn't mince their words. They were completely united in condemning Charlie Hebdo. These very people who condemned the Muslims and supported Charlie Hebdo had now suddenly united to condemn Charlie Hebdo as the disgusting magazine. Why? Because Charlie Hebdo had done to Brenda what it had done to the Muslim prophet's alleged image. It showed Brenda in a cartoon position, of course, sitting on the neck of Meghan Markle and making Meghan Markle complain that she couldn't breathe. So Charlie Hebdo had done a cartoon replacing the racist American policeman who sat on the neck of the victim of his murder, George Floyd, and making George Floyd complain that he couldn't breathe before he died of suffocation. Charlie Hebdo has made Brenda look like that policeman and Meghan Markle look like George Floyd. And the British Fleet Street are absolutely up in arms against Charlie Hebdo. How dare Charlie Hebdo publish such an insulting cartoon about our great queen? Now, look at the ethical and moral lesson in all of that. And then we move on to the latest position about Shamima Begum. Now, remember what we are doing about Shamima Begum. When we launched the campaign for justice for Shamima Begum, we separated the two. Shamima Begum, kind of in terms of age. We are not campaigning about Shamima Begum as she is now, because this is 2.5 years since she stopped being a child. We are campaigning for justice for Shamima Begum for the duration of her childhood. So, although we have published the picture this week that the Daily Boris Graph has kind of published about Shamima Begum looking, as they say, dressed in the Western way and looking to the West, and not dressed according to the code of the so-called Islamic State, so-called. What the editor of the Boris Graph, Telegraph, is saying to the subscribers to their e-newsletter, is the same propaganda that by dropping the so-called Islamic State dress code, she is now looking to the West for help. And that is the line. And we are saying that it doesn't contain, the daily Boris propaganda graph doesn't contain any reference to the duty to safeguard childhood or children that Tower Hamlets Council owed to Shamima Begum and failed to carry out and discharge. And this is the position today. There is no mention of that duty by any of the commenters, either the Telegraph or Anish Kapoor, or as a result of our campaign, I think that so-called lawyer is now looking for some kind of platform and excuse to come across as if he is also trying to campaign. If he does genuinely campaign, that is absolutely fine by us. But we are not in any way connected with him, and we are not going to get connected with him, and we are doing the campaign independently of him and any of the others that are connected with him or in career terms and career-wise ways. Except to make the point that he, Anish Kapoor and Frederick Forsyth, and about 3 others who have written about Shamima Begum or spoken about Shamima Begum since the 26th of February 2021, they're all imitating one another, and they're talking shabby things, fake things, not substantial things. And the substantial things begin with the role of the Tower Hamlets Council. And that is where we're sticking. And we say that this is the one that will actually make the difference. When Tower Hamlets Council is forced by our campaign to open up and admit, that will be the beginning of at least the acceptance of the obligations of the duties owed to these children and duties denied them, duties they were deprived of. And the deprivation actually caused all the further losses, deterioration, and distractions that these children were caused and went through. The one final point about this particular part, which is part C, is it part C or part B? We shall check again. Now we're talking about the police. Now, in the House of Commons, there has been a bill, the bill to increase powers for the police against protest, and the reference that this MacDonald makes in his letter about the raising of the police powers against protests. The raising of police powers is a complicated thing, but it must be diagnosed. as I have been saying, the police in Britain and in London already have too many powers. And the fact that the Conservatives even dared to put forward such a bill is not to be found. The reason for it is not to be found only in the Conservatives' strategy. The reason is to be found in the fact that the Labour Party has ceased to exist as a democratic party. And as I was saying, their kind of contribution in the so-called debate on this particular bill yesterday was pathetic. The person who spoke and whose speech I partly saw just for the fact of gathering evidence and fact checking was as stupid as any of the previous speakers, Labour Party frontbenchers, or speakers on the law and order and the police and all the rest of it. What I'm saying, therefore, is this: that the police in this country are out of control in terms of accountability. Not individual police. I cannot kind of find any individual police at this moment and name them as being the cause of this outlandish, excessive increase in the powers of police. Whatever powers the police are given in legislation, the police are entitled to then use or abuse, which is what happens. The key thing that is missing is the due process of accountability every day. There is no accountability for the police. Rather, there is no process of accountability that the police are subject to every day. They're not even subject to any accountability any day. So the police are being allowed to operate as being above the law throughout the year, every year, which is a mindset, which is a mentality that must have contributed to all the crimes at any level that the police commit against ordinary people in this country. Well, police are not going to like the comparison between them and the criminal gangs. So what differentiates a gang of criminals and a gang of police behaving like criminals? What distinguishes the two? Whatever distinguishes those two is the one that has to be emphasized and explained and empowered. Otherwise, women shall never be safe in the streets of England.